Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? By explanation, I'm wearing the shield with doctor's orders, basically, because I found that when I was wearing the mask while I was trying to teach, you guys were like, it was kind of ridiculous. So now I can wear the shield, and this is the only one I've got right now, while I'm teaching. So I can breathe, and you can hear me, and you don't have to resuscitate me or anything like that. And thank you, Garen, for resuscitating my camera so that all the at-home viewers can get this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, and I think I made it clear in the Google Classroom link. Let's see if anybody else picked up on that. Okay. Is a 2-hour documentary a 1-day assignment?
No, I think it's a 3-day assignment.
You did see it, and that's exactly what it is. Spread it out over 3 days. The only other thing that you're going to be doing at home, or like for homework / combination of the at-home day, like the blue day, is getting ready for the civics test, right? I know there's another quiz coming up, but I'm going to set that quiz. Yeah, not for this week, but I'll set it for after the civics test. So the civics test is going to be coming up for you guys on Thursday of next week, and of course next week that's the last day you're going to be in here before the fall break. Because you are special, we still keep you. We all get a fall break. Yeah, we all get a fall break. So it's a week long. So we're in school this week. You guys are here 3 days. Next week you're here 2 days. And then no days the week after. You got that? Careful. That's solid. All right. Is that cool? All right. And you can stand up all you, if you're not comfortable sitting down anytime, feel free. He's like, what? I'm standing. I'm comfortable. You know what? That makes perfect sense. Shall we do that? All right, let's go ahead and stand for the pledge. Yeah, you know it's coming. All right, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, awesome. Okay. All right, so we're going to go back. Go ahead and take your notes. We're going to be going back to the time. We'll get into the details of how the Spanish-American War played out. We'll get into some of the ramifications of the Spanish-American War. Big deal. If you don't have it written down already, Spanish-American War, the United States is into the empire. It's not like the Empire Strikes Back. It's like the empire is now created. Unless, of course, you're Mexico and you're saying, yeah, whatever. Empire, yeah. The United States is all about imperial conquest on the continent of North America. And, of course, Native Americans are looking around going, yeah, right. That one got away from us. So now, in the Spanish-American War, we're going to see the United States taking on territories overseas, not that far, Puerto Rico, but not Cuba. And then, of course, the Philippines and Guam. And then ultimately saying, what about Hawaii? Sure, fine, yeah, let's get this. Let's go ahead and take it. Yeah. Sure, we need the military base. I mean, that's pretty much going to be the rationale for that. Just keep in mind, we got other things going on in the world. I mean, the world is a happening place. Gosh, what is it? How many more weeks until the election day? Election's on a Tuesday, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in the month of November, which puts it at November 3rd. Actually, let me look at this. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. Shh, no! Shh, 5 weeks. 5 weeks. 5 weeks plus a day till the presidential election / every other election and so forth that's going on, including, like Ada County Highway District. I'm the treasurer for my brother's seeking Ada County Highway District Commission position. So it's like there's local, there's state, there's national. And I expect, if you've been following the news, I expect that there will be a vote to replace the vacant position in the United States Supreme Court. Anybody know who the President Trump nominated on Saturday? Amy Coney Barrett. Yeah. Amy Coney Barrett, like Coney Island. It's not Conan, like Arthur Conan Doyle. Who's Arthur Conan Doyle? Sherlock Holmes. Does Sherlock Holmes have a younger sister? Apparently now. Yeah, if you've been following any of that. So anyway, that's high stakes. It looks like the Republicans may be pulling together to get that through the Senate. And will that make a difference on Supreme Court? Absolutely. Is it going to make a difference in the outcome of the election? I don't know. There's all kinds of things that impact a presidential election, including, check it out, if you are interested, the first of three, I think it is, three presidential debates is on Tuesday night. Okay, and I think there's a vice presidential debate as well. And they will be present. I mean, they're both going to be present there. I'm trying to remember if there's going to be any people in the audience. I mean, there's going to be the moderator and I think one or two other questioners and so forth. So they're going to keep it. Wait, no, I did. I do remember. There is going to be a limited number of people in the audience. Very limited. Okay? Yeah, okay, any questions? Okay, again, prepare. It's 25 points. You want this to be a good, solid score going in. The civics test is very doable. It's all matching. 100 questions, each of them worth 1/4 point.
I feel like you're underestimating how much people
I'm not going to say anything, but trust me, there are some questions that are a little bit trickier than others, but some of them are patently easy. I mean, there would never be the kind of question that you would have, say, for example, on like the test you're going to take on this unit. Okay? Which one? Keep working about it. Keep working on that. It'll come to you. All right? Yeah. All right. Questions? Okay, let's do this. All right. Actually, there it is. Good. Some people say, if you didn't have this written down already, some people say that the Spanish-American War was caused by newspapermen trying to compete against each other to sell newspapers. Oh my gosh, the news media, like really, like trying to like take what's actually going on and, like present it in such a way that is more appealing to the bottom line of their business, which is selling newspapers. Okay? I mean, it's a competitive business. If you don't, I mean, when I was your age, you're going to think I'm a nerd, but that's okay. I subscribed to three different news magazines. I mean, they arrived. I was just like a connoisseur of news magazines. None of them publish, I don't believe any of them publish in writing now. Newsweek, Time, and U.S. News and World Report, I think they might all be sort of online now. But I'm just like voracious consumer of the news. And where I was growing up in Arlington, Virginia, we had delivered the local newspaper, which was the Washington Post, right? And that was before the internet. Now on the internet, it's like getting all kinds of various different news sources. And I'm kind of an impatient person. I don't like to necessarily listen to somebody going on like a television news broadcast and so forth, because you have to sit there and listen to what they say. If I want to hear what somebody's going to say, I'll usually typically get it from a clip. All right, so if I want to hear exactly what words come out of Biden or Trump's mouths, I will click on the clip as opposed to, but that's the news business. I mean, Fox and MSNBC and CNN, they sell their news on the basis primarily of advertising and actual people watching the screen. Well, these guys made their money on actual sales of newspapers and advertising. And of course, the advertising is very important because your ad rates, how much you can charge somebody to put an ad in your newspaper depends on how many people you distribute it to, right? And so they wanted to distribute it to a lot of people, all right? So this is an interesting thing. Make sure you have that in your notes because this is one of those things as we look through history, we look at how it's being observed. You guys, when you're doing your research on your papers, depending on what the topic is, ancient times, I don't think there's going to be like newspaper competition. But depending on what your thing is, I mean, even now, it's like there's competition, and does the news media impact and affect or is affected by what is going on? Yes, it's interwoven, and it's fascinating. It's fair to say the Spanish-American War probably wouldn't have happened except for the fact that the American people really were mad. Many of the American people really were mad at Spain. And if I wanted to get you guys mad at one of these countries, I could like highlight and highlight and highlight terrible things going on in that country. Okay, well then here we go. Take it up. Take up the charge. But I mean, it's like, it is a fascinating thing. And of course, it's an attention thing because your attention, especially nowadays, oh my gosh, your attention is drawn to that. But if your attention moves away, it's like, George Floyd who? Oh, now people, of course, who looked at what happened with George Floyd would say, we need to keep focusing on that and get the problem solved. Because do problems get solved if you turn your attention away from it? I don't know. Sometimes people will go, just let's be calm, let's look at it, and of course, some people will say, we really need to solve it by appointing a commission to find out what really went on. Other people will say, that's just a way to push it off to the side because they're really not going to get anything done with it. And you're like, oh my gosh, well, which is it? Should we make a really quick decision? Should we make a really quick decision based on what we think are the facts right now? Well, what was the really quick decision that occurred? Let's check the date again. One. Yeah, blame it on Spain. Exactly. Blame it on Spain. What was the decision? Let me see. Let me get the date. February 15th, 1898. I think you got that in your notes, right? February 15th, 1898, the Maine blew up. So first, Haley, what was the Maine, a United States naval vessel, what was it doing in the harbor in Cuba? Let me ask you this. I'll give you two choices. Was it there, one, as a provocation to Spain saying, hey, there's more ships coming and we're coming after you, or B, in case American citizens in Cuba needed to get out because things were getting a little bit too dangerous? You think A? B, write this down. President McKinley, Commander-in-Chief, had sent the Maine as a precautions in case U.S. citizens needed to get out. I mean, and this happens. One of the most famous pictures I remember seeing was a picture of U.S. personnel climbing up a staircase on the top of the United States Embassy in Saigon as the South Vietnamese government fell. We were getting our people out. And of course, there were a lot of South Vietnamese who wanted to get out too. We had our military there not for active engagement in military fighting or anything like that. They were there on a rescue. And the Maine, Haley, everybody, presumably was there to pull Americans out in case, the rebellion got started up again and American lives were in danger. You got that? Now, of course, the Spanish might have seen that differently. If you're going to attack, how many ships do you send in? One? You send in a fleet. If you're going to threaten, like, when we threatened Japan and said in the 1850s, hey, Japan, we got one ship here, and I notice you don't have any ships like that, and we're going to come back next year unless you change your policy. And, of course, they did change their policy. And then, of course, they industrialized and militarized and et cetera, and we'll be talking more about those guys. But here's the deal, all right? On February 15th, 1898, the Maine blew up. We know that, okay? It blew up. Now, we do know now, Austin, how did it blow up? What was the cause? What do we know now? After extensive investigation on blast patterns and the way the metal shards... No, I'm sorry, Austin, I'm trying to hear Austin. No. It was an accident. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it was an accident, right? It was defective equipment. But make sure you have this written down. The initial American investigation, which was not very thorough, blamed Spain. All right? So, what did the newspapers report? Yeah, war, we can sell more papers. Oh, that's so cynical. Really? The newspapers want war? Well, they did sell more newspapers, and then when the war was taking place, write this down, they sent correspondence with the soldiers in the battle. And they reported back to the voracious news readers. This sort of thing had been going on going back to the Civil War. How could you do that in the Civil War? How could you actually get reports from the front battlefields back to the readers in Philadelphia, New York, or Boston, whoever? Not just runners, but they run to a place, and then it is, here we go, deep, 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 deep. That's right, the telegraph. And the telegraph was a major way, even at that time, of getting the news out. Watch this. It's going to be fascinating, because if you look at wars later in history, are there going to be war correspondents along with the United States military troops in, say, World War II? Oh, yeah. Okay, now there's sort of limitation on things that they can report. You know, they can't say, we're about to attack such and such, beep, 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 beep. No. But it was very interesting because when you get to the Vietnam War, I had a student do an IA on this. Very, very interesting thing. During the Vietnam War, the war correspondents at the front lines reported back some things that didn't necessarily bolster support for the war. They're like, a lot of people are getting killed, and it's not really clear that we're moving forward in this. Okay? Later, when the United States was involved fighting in the Persian Gulf and fighting against Iraq, they didn't allow the news correspondents to go every single place where the soldiers were. They tried to manage that news media coverage because does news media coverage make a difference in support for the war and the outcome of the war? Heck yeah. Big difference. Right? These guys were like, war, it's exciting, let's do it. That was the news correspondents, okay? Because the Maine blew up, and of course their headlines, you know, they want revenge. Write that down. And there was a lot of people in the United States of America that were like, let's get revenge. Now this is a weird one, because in history, we know when Japan attacked the United States of America, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, Franklin D. Roosevelt, went to Congress the next day and gave a speech and asked Congress to do what it could do constitutionally, which is declare war. And they did. In fact, Roosevelt basically said, war is already taking place. We want you to affirm that war exists as of yesterday when we got attacked. Make sure to put this down. It wasn't McKinley that was going to Congress for a declaration of war. McKinley was sort of like, what do you want to do? And Congress passed a declaration of war. Write that down. Congress passed a declaration of war. Now, there were some people who are like, we're not in favor of this. I mean, this looks like this is something, maybe we should look a little bit more carefully. Are we going to war seriously on the basis of, like, Spain is mean to Cubans and a ship blew up? Because we're really not entirely sure. But nevertheless, the majority went along with it in the House and the Senate, so you got a declaration of war. Question. Will the commander-in-chief take that declaration of war and actually order his troops to go into battle? Yep. As it turns out, yes. Write it down. McKinley now sends his troops into battle. And this is where we're going to find out if the United States is going to be ready for the war. Now, one thing that we did, and this is very, very important that you write this down, one thing that we did anticipate was the question of, well, if we go to war and win, which is ultimately what took place, 113 days, you have that in your notes already? 113 days is all it took. I mean, the war was very quick. Spain got clobbered, okay? Especially the naval part, but the land part as well. So then the question is, what are we going to do if we go after Spain and remove Spain as the controlling country for these territories beyond Spain? What about Cuba? Are we going to keep that? Well, the Cuban independence movement really didn't want us to remove Spain and then put ourselves in there, but there were some people like, well, sure, why not? We got Florida, we took that from Spain, you know. Senator Teller, along with a majority in the Senate, introduced and then passed the Teller Amendment. Make sure you have that in your notes. The Teller Amendment is going to be very popular among Cuban independence fighters. The Teller Amendment basically says, should the United States get rid of Spain and control of Cuba, we support Cuban independence. And so will Cuba become an independent country shortly after Spain is kicked out? Yes. Now, there's going to be another amendment. We'll talk about that later on. It's kind of like an asterisk. It's kind of like, well, did I tell you I was going to give this? Well, hold on just a minute. Don't get too excited. There's some other, like, strings attached. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about as far as the Platt Amendment is concerned. Okay? Yeah. All right, so, two different things. We've got the fight in the Pacific. What? There's a fight in the Pacific? Well, sure. We're at war with Spain. I mean, we're going to take them on everywhere. Make a note of this. Did we take on Spain in Spain? No. That would have been really hard to take on Spain in Spain. I mean, like, what are we going to do? Overthrow the Spanish government and then institute, like, rule by the Spanish, you know? So we didn't go after Spain itself. But we did go after Spanish military assets in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, okay? The Philippines and Guam, right, in the Pacific, and then, of course, in the Caribbean, Cuba and Puerto Rico. In the Pacific, that's where the fighting got started first. We had the United States military, United States Navy We had a Pacific fleet. We had an Atlantic fleet. If you go into the Navy today, could you also be assigned to the Indian Ocean? I mean, what the heck? Do we have strategic interests and so forth that are connected to the Indian Ocean today that we would have like a big naval force there? Yeah, what flows into the Indian Ocean is the Persian Gulf, and the Persian Gulf is right next to Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and lots of oil. You better believe we've got military assets there. Commodore Dewey is the Commodore. He is the top naval officer who takes an 8-ship squadron, just 8 ships in the United States Navy, heading to Manila in the Philippines. Okay, the Philippines, that's the largest city in the Philippines that was Spanish-controlled. They encountered a 10-ship Spanish fleet, naval fleet. So the United States 8 versus Spain 10. Who do you see the advantage going to? Well, you see the numbers going to Spain, but what else do you want to know? What else do you want to know about the qualities of those ships? How good they were. Well, what is some goodness quality that you could get in a naval ship in 1898? Guns. They both have guns. I mean, hello, they're naval ships. Who's got better guns? We do. We have better guns. What is a quality of a better gun on a naval vessel? Okay, more boom. Okay, more explosive impact. What's another component? How about range? Okay, how about range? Better range is better because if you can hit them sooner than they can hit you, it could be over. And you can be like, ha ha, you fell short. That's important. What is another component of a naval vessel that's very important? Think defense against booming, like things being launched toward you. Durability. What do you want in a ship at this particular time period in history? Not sink. Yes, of course not sink. Metal. Right. He's laughing, but he's right. Metal, iron, right? Our ships were modern. They had iron protection. Steel even. I want to say steel. Yeah, better than just plain old iron. The Spanish fleet was wooden. Yeah, which worked maybe, 50, 60 years before, but not in 1898. We destroyed their entire fleet. Got it? Which makes it interesting because we destroy their fleet and then we wait. Write this down. We wait. We've got this question, should we attack and take over the Spanish military army base right there in the Philippines? And part of our thinking was, well, are we all excited about, the mistreatment? I mean, if you look really closely, the Filipinos weren't being treated that well anyway. But, I mean, it's not like that was the major reason for the war. Nevertheless, we're looking and going, should we attack, should we attack, should we attack? Well, let's look at that before we get to what's going on in the Caribbean. Part of the thinking of the United States was, well, if we don't land forces and take over the islands from Spain, somebody else is going to. Write that down. Part of the reason the United States decided, this is probably the best, most altruistic reason why the United States overthrows the Spanish, because obviously the Spanish can't control that territory. I mean, it's like they can't stand up to the United States. How are they going to be able to stand up to some other European power which might be and was going around in the Pacific as well as Africa and taking over and establishing a bigger and bigger empire? Which European country did we figure they were going to take the Philippines if Spain remained in control, or if the Filipino resistance itself? Write it down. The Filipinos had a resistance movement, and it was led by this man, Emilio Aguinaldo. They had a Philippine resistance movement, independence movement, just like Cuba did. And if this guy and his soldiers took charge of Philippines, maybe they wouldn't last very long. Raise your hand if you can identify. Which is the European country that folks were looking around going, yeah, they're going to move in. If the United States doesn't, they're going to move in and they're going to take it. No, it wasn't Britain. Good guess. Britain does have the Navy to carry that out, although they had lots of various different assets and so forth. But there was another one that had become the #1 economic power in Europe by 1900. Write it down. It was Germany. So there was a sense that Germany would move in and take it over. And so the United States was like, well, we don't want it to fall into the hands of Germany, so we'll take it. Although, write this down, there were people in the United States who were like, we should have an empire. Teddy Roosevelt, for example. We should have an empire. We're a big country. Everybody else is doing it. Everybody else has got an empire. We need to have an empire, some land, so that we can get those resources directly, so that we can have access to those markets directly, so that we don't have to go, maneuver around all those areas that the Europeans have control of. You got that? So here's the weird thing. The United States makes the decision to attack, and we kind of keep it sort of secret from our ally, Aguinaldo. It's one of the strangest things. Write this down. August 13, 1898, the Battle of Manila. August 13, 1898, the Battle of Manila. Aguinaldo thought, finally, they're sending their Marines off the ships. They're sending an army. The United States is landing an army to overthrow the Spanish installation, and they're going to hand it to us. It's almost like, yay, the Teller Amendment for the Philippines. We didn't pass a Teller Amendment for the Philippines. We did for Cuba. The weird thing is we'd already been in communication with the Spanish authorities. They knew we were coming. They didn't want to surrender to Aguinaldo. They didn't like what Aguinaldo and those guys would have done to him because of the position and so forth that had been taking place over many years. Because those guys have been repressed by the Spanish authorities in the Philippines. The Spanish authorities wanted to surrender to who? The United States. Were they prepared to surrender to the United States? Yes. And so the battle itself was kind of for show. There was not a lot of casualties. The Spanish surrendered very quickly to, boom, the United States of America. And Aguinaldo and his forces are like, wow, this is great. Okay, hand me the keys to the city. America, hello, America, hand it over. Did we? No, write that down. We did not. We did not. I mean, it's like, in the eyes of the Philippine independence movement, that was like a betrayal. I was like, what the heck? Write it down. Those guys are going to be, not too long thereafter, fighting for their independence against who? Us. Yeah. United States forces are going to be engaged in a brutal fight with Philippine insurgents for quite a while, and we will crush it at great cost, obviously on both sides, especially the Philippine side. So what do we want? Do we want to hang on to the Philippines forever and ever and ever? It looks like that's kind of what we're thinking about doing. We'll make it part of our empire. Oh, here we go. Get this. We will give it the benefits of real Western civilization. It's like the white man's burden, because there's a lot of darker-skinned people in the Philippines compared to, European heritage Americans and so forth. We will bring them proper, Christian belief systems and education. And actually, we did do a fair amount of that. But there's one key fact. The Filipinos really didn't want to have the United States there. And it's not going to be until we get into President Wilson that we're actually going to start hearing American presidents going, okay, fine. We'll start getting ready to hand it over to you. Make a little note of this. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but since we're talking about the Philippines, when did we actually let the Philippines be independent? When did the Philippines actually gain their independence? I mean, they became our territory in 1898. It wasn't until after World War II.
Wow.
Yeah. It took a while. So there's like a little bit of the focus on the Philippine component of the war. All right? Now, let's move to the eastern, the fight in the Atlantic. There were some Americans who thought, oh no, the Spanish Navy is going to attack our shores. Just like there were people on the west coast of the United States after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. They're like, oh no, the Japanese are going to come and attack the west coast. What do we do? Let's round up every Japanese American and put him in confinement. Okay, we'll get to that in World War II. But I mean, what's the United States going to do? Well, the fear of being invaded on the eastern coast is going to go away very quickly, because it's like, oh, wow, the Spanish fleet really sucks. They're at the bottom of the Manila harbor, and it doesn't look like they're doing much in the Atlantic. So really what was taking place now is the effort on the part of the United States military to get ready to invade the major Spanish military force in Cuba. Write it down. That's our goal, right? Do you think we're going to have much difficulty with the Spanish Navy? No. In fact, I'll give you this one. The Spanish Navy in Santiago in Cuba, when we get there and we fight them, we will have one dead. I'm not even sure how that actually happened. I'm not sure. Because sometimes, sometimes it's like stuff blows up. It's like how many people died on the Maine? Yeah. I mean, if somebody dies in a fight, a friendly fire or something like that, or, some equipment failure, I mean, they are a casualty of war. About 500 Spanish are going to be dead and all their ships are going to be destroyed. So write that down. I mean, that's no surprise. The naval part is not an issue. There's no question. It's not even close. So, what about the land part? Now, this one is very important. Listen very carefully. The United States was not ready to organize an army to fight overseas. Not even close. Okay? Well, you're thinking, well, when did we ever have to do that before? Did we fight against Britain? If you go back to the War of 1812, it's like, yeah, they landed on our shores and were burning down the Capitol, and we're like, can we call this done? It's like, maybe in the Mexican-American War, as I recall, there was some landing of troops, coming in into Mexican territory. So put this down. We had a lot of soldiers who volunteered at that time to fight in the war because there was a lot of excitement. And let me make sure you write this down. One, there wasn't a big United States Army at the time. It's not like we had a big, regular, standing army. I mean, what military threats did we have, say, after the Civil War? Native Americans. We had if you were like United States military, post-Civil War, all the way to 1900, most of the combat and so forth is going to be with Native Americans. And it is mostly going to be victory after victory after victory, and quite a few massacres thrown in there as well, with a big exception, the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General Custer and his troops were pretty much wiped out. But that's the exception. And actually, by the time you get to 1898, there's not really too much conflict going on anymore. So we don't have a big army. Write that down. We don't have a big, regular, trained army. We have a lot of people that want to volunteer. Teddy Roosevelt is one of them. Why does he want to volunteer? Why do some of these guys want to volunteer? Write this down because this is going to help you get into the mindset of young men at the time. War and fighting war is a sign of masculinity, and that is the thing you need to do as a young man. And if war comes during your youth, you better sign up and get involved. Otherwise, you are not a manly person. You are a coward. Whoa. They didn't even have those kinds of questions coming up in regular discourse back in those days. Okay? Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you were actually a woman who's like, I want to fight too, then you got to dress up like a man. And there were. I mean, the Civil War, I mean, you can do it. You're like, really? There were women who fought in the Civil War? Yeah, and they had to go all Mulan. I mean, they had to disguise their femininity because they were not allowed to fight otherwise. Yeah, anyway. So you had these guys, and they're like, it's really messed up because it's like later when we get to World War I, and we got all these people all over the place like, let's fight, let's fight, let's fight. And then, of course, modern wars like mechanized. So you get all these young, virile men getting shot down into the fields of battle very quickly. Whoa, that's what happens when you don't have a lot of wars going on over a long period of time. What was the last war that, like, the United States have been seriously involved in? Yeah, no, well, the Civil War, and there was a lot of people involved in that. So here's the deal. Teddy Roosevelt, he actually had like a high executive position in the McKinley administration. He's like, I don't want to be behind a desk. Write it down. He's like, forget that. I want to be in charge of a regiment. I want to be in charge, and he puts together a cavalry unit that is going to be known as the Rough Riders. Okay, they're the most well-known United States military unit in the war. Okay, it's a volunteer group. He organizes it. And who does he get to join in? It's interesting. It's an interesting group. You get some of the people that he knows from like Harvard and the East Coast, elites, young men. They're like, I don't want to just sit around and play, polo and so forth. I want to get on my horse and like destroy the Spanish. So we got those guys, and then you mix it in with a bunch of his guys that he knew like from his cowboy days in the West, and they come in and they're all really good horsemen. Write this down. How many horses actually went to Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders? Practically none. I mean, it's like, and you're like, why not? Didn't the United States have a very well-organized component where they had ships to take all of the military people and horses and equipment over to Cuba? No, write it down. That is clear. We'd never really done that before. You had all these guys showing up in Florida at the base, at the harbor, to load up on ships, and there weren't enough ships, and they were just sort of clambering on board. It was like, oh my gosh, this is messed up. Make note of this. Message for the American government and the military. If you're ever going to go to war again overseas, you need to have that part well organized. Will the United States get involved in World War I? Yes. Will we focus on actually getting all the equipment and all the people and everything we need to go over there across the Atlantic to fight? Is it going to happen like that? No. It actually does take some time. I mean, even in modern times when we're like, Saddam Hussein, he did this in the summer of 1990. Saddam Hussein, shame on you for attacking Kuwait. How long did it take us to assemble all the heavy equipment and so forth that we needed to go to war with him? Months, yeah, like not even a few months. I want to say like 6 or 7 months, and then we had it all together, and then we're like, okay, we're ready. Boom. Okay? So that is going to be one of the problems. Next, write this down. We're not going to be challenged so much by the fight as we're not prepared for some of the real dangers, disease dangers. Write this down. More American soldiers died from malaria in Cuba than died from war-related injuries. Yeah, so you have to have that part too, right? The American population is not well suited to handle malaria. Not that people in tropical areas are well suited to handle malaria, but we have no experience with that in our particular climate. And so that was a real problem. Malaria and typhoid and yellow fever. A lot of them get sick, okay? But in fact, the fighting works out pretty well. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders will have success. Write it down. San Juan Hill, and when you watch the video, the documentary and so forth, you're going to see about all the things and so forth. And the newspaper men are there, and it's a victory, and way to go. Teddy Roosevelt, man, you're the man. We ought to elect you to something. How about governor of New York? He'll be elected governor of New York. And then we're like, oh, maybe vice president of the United States. He's elected vice president of the United States. How did he become president? President got shot and killed. McKinley did. Yeah. So anyway, this military victory worked out very well for his political career. But notice this. I want to tell you this. There was a group that actually did play a critical role in the victory against the Spanish. And they weren't given much credit. And you can look and go, oh my gosh, really? Seriously? Wow. Maybe because the readers didn't really want to read about it and so forth. It was African American troops. They played a critical supportive role in the Battle of San Juan Hill, but not given much credit for it. And in fact, in those days, the military was segregated. It was segregated in the Civil War. It was segregated after that. It was segregated in this war. It was segregated in World War I. It was segregated in World War II. Who's the guy, who was the president, remember last year, who finally said, enough of this, I'm commander-in-chief. No more segregation in the military. No, it was not Barack. Are you kidding me? You think that issue went along all the way to Barack Obama? No, it was Harry Truman, and Harry Truman did it. And that was even before Brown versus Board of Education. Harry Truman was like, this is my military, boom, it's desegregated. But, no, it was not Trump. No, it was not Trump. Okay, so let's see. Spanish defense is destroyed, Battle of San Juan Hill, Cuba comes under the control of the Americans. Wow, we're moving on this. This is good. This is good. So what do we have at the end of the day? The United States wins. Woohoo! Okay. Spanish are defeated. We've got control of the Philippines, having destroyed the Spanish forces, having destroyed the Spanish Navy there and taken the surrender of the Spanish army because they didn't want to be like, and then we defeat the Spanish forces in Cuba. And of course we sit down and negotiate. Let me see, where are we going to negotiate? Where's a good place to negotiate? Paris, very good. Paris. Everyone goes to Paris for negotiations. Let's go to Paris for negotiations. They've got lovely hotels and da-da-da-da. So we sign a treaty at Paris. Now notice, the United States is there, and Spain is there. Notice who's not there. No Filipino representation, very good, and no Cuban representation. So this is just between the United States and Spain. And actually in the Cuban situation, the Cubans were involved in the fight, and they were involved before the Americans got there, and they were involved while and so forth. And they were like, thank you very much, America. Oh, and thank you for the Teller Amendment, which says you're going to leave. So at the Treaty of Paris, what did we get? Well, we got pretty much everything we wanted. Write it down. We got Cuba to be handed over to the Cubans. Austin, what else did we get? What else? Let me see. What does the Spanish have? It's kind of like, ooh, I'm victorious. Let me see. What do you have? I'm going to grab Cuba. What else do they have in the Caribbean? PR. Puerto Rico. Very good. Did we take it? Yes, we did. What about in the Pacific? Philippines. Did we take it? Yes, although, write this down, we paid $20 million for it. Yeah, I mean, actually it was weird because it was sort of technical because the agreement to no longer fight had occurred before we actually went into the Philippines and took the surrender of the forces there. So $20 million. And then, of course, Guam. Okay? We took Guam. I mean, does Guam have any, like, assets as far as, like, that we would want to turn it into a military base? Heck yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can see right here, Guam. So there's the Philippines with a lot of population and so forth. Guam is also very, very important, strategically located for U.S. military, naval interests and so forth. And we still do have that. It's part of the Northern Marianas and so forth in the Pacific. Got that? So, and of course, you know, we're like, oh, well, let's just keep the Philippines and oh, wait. And there was one other territory we took that the Spanish didn't have, but had been offered to us by a bunch of white sugar plantation owners. Mia, what else did we take in 1898? And we looked in the middle of the Pacific and said, that would work very well as a naval base place. Hawaii, oh, nice. Hawaii, yes. We annexed Hawaii in 1898, and it made a lot of sense to do it then because now we've got military assets in Guam, the Philippines, and then halfway across the Pacific. And it still is a very important military asset for the United States of America. I think if there were a movement on the part of Hawaiians to like secede from the United States, I think the military would chime in and go, oh, do we really want that? You know, so we shall see. All right? That makes sense? So now we got an empire. We've got a big empire. What are we going to do with that big empire? Yeah, build a Death Star. Here's one issue. Let's go ahead and dive right into it here. There are over 7 million people in the Philippines at that time. They weren't really keen on having outsiders in charge, whether they're Spanish and now the United States. It looks like to some that maybe that's just too much empire. I mean, if you look at it, it's like, why did we go to war with Spain? Did we go to war with Spain because of the Philippines? No, we went to war with Spain because of what happened where? In Cuba, right, with the Maine. And, of course, we were already prepped because, you know, Spain had been treating the Cubans really bad. But it was very interesting because in the midst of this, and notice this, when we taught you this last year in government, a treaty can be signed. This is very important. Keep it in mind when we get to World War I, the Treaty of Versailles that ends World War I. You can have a treaty signed by all the top people like the president and yada, yada, yada. But in the United States Constitution, when does that treaty actually become binding to the American government? It's an important question. What? Someday? Can the president just take out a pen and go, I've reached an agreement? I mean, Barack Obama made an agreement with Iran. It was not even officially a treaty. It was an agreement. It never got ratified. That's the key word. Write that down. If you make a treaty, it has to be ratified by, this is no small thing, 2/3 of a vote of the Senate. Whoa. And Barack Obama was like, no, that's not going to happen. So he's like, well, I'll call it an agreement with Iran and these other countries, which means that the next president, Donald Trump, can look at that agreement and go, I blew my nose in this agreement. It is not binding on us. Right? So this went to the Senate, and a leading person on the other side of the aisle, Democrat William Jennings Bryan, who was a presidential contender for the Democrats 4 elections. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. He was the nominee 4 times, and he lost 4 times, which is why his picture's right not up there. Okay, but he was very significant. He came out in favor of the treaty. He said, hey, we won, we might as well ratify the treaty because we have to accept for peace. I don't want us to have the Philippines forever and ever and ever, but we can work on that later. And so his support will be very, very critical. All right? We'll continue next time by looking at Puerto Rico, and then we'll get to the Platt Amendment, where the United States says, hey, Cuba, not so fast. We've got some conditions on you getting that territory. Whoa, and they're not going to be happy about that. But we'll talk about that next time. Okay?